Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good. Well done, well done. You can see when it's a school crowd, they know how to respond. I'm Michaela English. I'm the president and CEO of Fight for Children. I want to welcome all of you here today. This is our second Ahead of the Curve conference in 2014. Fight for Children and the DC Public Charter School Board launched this series this year to provide a forum for DC school leaders to collaborate and share resources. For Fight for Children, this is part of our Quality Schools Initiative, which is our signature K-12 program in which we make direct investments in promising schools, some of whom are here today, and ongoing professional development and best practice sharing, such as we're doing today. You can read more about this program, the Quality Schools Initiative, in your program books. I want to offer a special thanks today to several of our conference sponsors, the Walton Family Foundation, the Flamboyant Foundation, Julie and Andy Klingenstein, who are here, and PNC Bank. Thanks also to our other sponsors of the Quality Schools Initiative, who are also listed in your program book. And then a big thanks, a special thanks to Discovery Education for letting us use their fantastic space today, and you'll be hearing more about them later. It's really a thrill for me to be here. I used to work for Discovery and spent several very happy years in this building, so it's fun to be back. It's a particular pleasure to welcome Frank Florence, who is with Discovery Education. Frank is the Director of Market Development for Charter and Private School Systems for Discovery Education. Join me in welcoming Frank.
Thanks, Michaela. Appreciate that. We're very excited at Discovery Education to be able to host today's event, and welcome to all of you today. The team has put together a great agenda. I'm sure you'll be very pleased with all the work today. We're also very happy at Discovery Education to support the great work of Fight for Children and the DC Public Charter School Board. As you may have known, we're doing some things in this room that is really making a difference in the lives of children. And the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools recently did an in-depth research project over the summer. It named DC the #1 region in the country for effective charter school systems. So let's give ourselves a round of applause on that. There was 116 points on this survey, which looked at innovation, quality, growth, things like that. And DC scored 104 points out of 116 possible points. The next region was Louisiana with 85 points, and some states came in with 30 and 40 points. So 104 points out of 116 points. It was a fantastic result, fantastic work we're doing. And again, the children really benefit from it. If we don't fight for children, who will? So again, we're very pleased to support the great work of the group. Discovery is also pleased to play a big role in education. As you probably know, today we support something like 1 million teachers across the country in USA K through 12. We're very pleased to do that, and something like 35 million students use Discovery content every day. You'll hear more about that later, but we have a huge program. We need to get after it and get on with it, so I'll turn it back to Michaela once again. Welcome to Discovery Education. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Frank, and thanks again to Discovery for allowing us to be here today. It's now my pleasure to introduce our opening panel. We're lucky to have Maeve Ward from the Gates Foundation to facilitate this morning's session. Maeve's work deals with public opinion research on education issues, including the Common Core state standards. She will lend us her national perspective in the conversation with panelists Susie Cannon from Achievement Prep, Katrina Foster from the Henderson Hopkins School in Baltimore, and Abdullah Zaki from Kelly Miller Middle School, a DCPS school. So welcome, all of you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having us here. I wanted to begin by asking each of our panelists just to very briefly introduce yourselves. I think everyone has your bios in their programs, but just so they can put faces together with it.
Sure, I'll start. Good morning, everyone. My name is Katrina Foster, and I'm the principal of a school with a very long name. The name of our school is Elmer A. Henderson, a Johns Hopkins Partnership School. We call our school Henderson Hopkins for short. We are a public charter school that has a contract with the Baltimore City Public School District. And this is my 3rd year as principal of our school.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Abdullah Zaki. I'm going into my 5th year at Kelly Miller Middle School. It's in Ward 7. Essentially, I've been a principal there since 2010, and over that course of time, our student achievement in reading has gone up close to 24%. In a nutshell, we went from 17% reading in math to 35 and 51 reading in math through the hard work of the teachers that we have on our team.
Great. Good morning, everybody. My name is Susie Cannon. I am the Chief Academic Officer at Achievement Prep, which is a public charter school located in Ward 8 in Washington, D.C. We opened 7 years ago, and I've been on the team since we were founded in 2008, coming on as the founding Director of Academic Achievement and then moving into the role of Chief Academic Officer. Prior to that, I was with another charter school in Ward 7, and prior to that with DCPS.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to start off by asking the panel a couple of questions, and then we'll turn it over to all of you for your questions. So I thought that I would start by asking for something that has surprised you with Common Core implementation, and then tell us how you dealt with that surprise.
And I can start. So in Baltimore City, we have been working with a Common Core implementation plan for a number of years. So I think our district did a really great job of preparing school leaders first for some of the instructional shifts that were going to come as a result of Common Core. I think that they did a pretty good job of preparing teachers to the degree that they could with some of the curricular changes that were going to take place. What surprised me, though, was the impact of the change on our families. Once we started to hear parents say, I don't know how to help my child do their homework. I don't understand why my child's scores are suddenly below average when they were above before. So the conversation that we've been having a lot is really how do we onboard our families and stakeholders in the community to understand the reason for the increase in rigor, the reason for the shifts, and how they can support students as a part of our work.
And how have you addressed that challenge?
Sure. So we have done a very intentional strategic plan this year regarding family and community engagement around the Common Core. So one thing that we're doing actually in February is having a parent university. So prior, we had been doing literacy night, math night, science night, these kind of one-night shows and exhibitions of student work. Our parent university is actually going to take place over the course of 6 Saturday mornings. Parents are going to be able to receive some continuing education credit in partnership with our university partner, Johns Hopkins University. And through that partnership, parents will be able to take classes that deal specifically with some of the key instructional shifts within grade level bands. So, you know, we're talking about how to dive deeper into text, how to work with children with automaticity, you know, kind of big buckets of things that will really help parents know how to help their children and support their children.
Great, thank you.
So for me, one thing that surprised me is just we all understand that the world is becoming a lot more technical and advanced, and the text that our students, or the text that adults and students are coming into contact with is much more informational. So helping teachers, the initial resistance that we had to get teachers to understand that while literature is important, while having students be able to, like say, interact with great works of literature is extremely important, what they're going to interact with just as much is technical text. And so getting teachers to overcome the idea that, hey, we can't spend, you know, an entire semester reading The Outsiders. We have to actually get our students to get technical text in front of them was a surprise to me, because it was just, hey, this is just, you know, like where we are right now. And so some of the things that we had to do to overcome that were a lot of just technical fixes, meaning we had to incorporate a mandatory complex text week, and I can talk about that a little bit later, where our teachers are required to make sure that our students are interacting with primary source documents, or documents that are more informational than just straight literary. And again, it was a big shift in terms of the mindset of an ELA teacher. Once we get to the secondary level, a lot of teachers are not thinking about teaching the fundamentals of reading and writing. They want to talk about the art of reading and writing, and helping teachers understand that our students are going to be assessed on the way in which they can respond to and interact with informational text, we have to make sure that our practices are changing at the same time.
Mm-hmm. And I would say for us, I think one of the most shocking things was really working with our teachers and our leaders at both of the campuses, and folks, and I'm not talking about just our new teachers, right? So teachers who have been teaching for multiple years, who really presented themselves as experts in their craft, experts in their content, now with the deeper pushes and what's really required. You know, the same celebration that used to occur, okay, we got a child to the right answer, that's great, that's what it is. It's the conceptual understanding and really being able to develop and push folks to saying, it's not about arriving at the correct answer and only one way. What are 3 or 4 other ways that we can do this? And so even folks who had, you know, 7, 8 years of experience and really felt like, oh, I know how to teach main idea, now understanding that just main idea alone is not going to cut it. How are we synthesizing all of these skills together? How are we truly creating deep critical readers and mathematicians that understand the deep conceptual understanding? And so for us, really having to change and shift around how we were developing first our leaders, who we were very proud to have grown from within our campuses, but again, they were teachers at the time when it was the old standards, and so their understanding was still limited to that as well. And so really creating different opportunities for our departments to come together to really collaborate and to look at one standard instead of looking at it for just a few hours, now really saying we're going to deep dive into the standard for the next week and a half and really dig into every single thing that needs to happen and how we bring children to a different level of understanding.
And what are some of the ways that you've created those opportunities?
So we actually totally revamped how we run our daily schedule. We moved from a system where we had a separate reading block and a writing block and combined to a now a more comprehensive literacy block, which then also created common planning time for all of our literacy and math teachers so that we can have more of that learning community outside of just days that are dedicated to professional development. So now on a daily basis, the teams are coming together, looking at a standard, looking at something that is vertically aligned so that we really are attacking it in different ways.
Great. So I think that we're all here today because implementing the Common Core is something that is challenging and is hard. But tell us about something that has gone well in your school or in your schools.
Great. So I'll stick with literacy. Literacy has been really difficult for us since we opened. We say all the time, we have not cracked the literacy nut yet. And so it is something that we're constantly revisiting. Maybe it's a little premature to say that it's going really well, but one thing we're very excited about at this point, for the first time ever this year, we actually adopted, I'm going to say it a little bit loosely, we adopted the Engage New York literacy modules at our middle school campus, which is grades 4 through 8. We are a school that creates all of our curriculum internally at our middle school level. And for us, one of the things that we realized was we can't, if everything's an emergency, nothing's an emergency, right? So teachers can't be focusing all of their time on creating materials while also balancing how they're going to focus on all the instructional shifts. So we said we've got to do something different. We need to be able to provide really stellar exemplars of what needs to be happening in our ELA classes. And so a lot of work was done prior to rolling this out, literally going through every module, every single lesson, and annotating where certain things may not work for our scholars and where certain things were going to work, and different ideas, and where that sounds nice, but we don't have 400 index cards to give you 3 days a week, so do something else, and really gave that to teachers instead so that they were then equipped to go into the classroom and focus really almost all of their attention on the instructional shifts that are required. And obviously it's too soon to tell. I mean, it's great to say it feels good right now. We don't have the data to support it, but I do know that the teachers and the scholars are really engaged in just a totally different level of discussion and analysis of text that we're very excited about.
So one thing that has I would say has gone well from us is mixing or balancing the competing initiatives that just exist, whether you're a charter school or whether you're in DCPS, with trying to get ahead of the game, or in this case, ahead of the curve. So, so 3 years ago, that's when we started implementing our complex text initiative. And essentially what we do once a month, we carve out a week where all of our teachers, except for math teachers, all of our teachers across all grade levels focus on complex text. That's where we do our close reading. That's where our students utilize, and that's where we teach and students utilize all the reading strategies to help students interact with the complex text. And what happens is, well, so it started off as, this is part of what I was talking about earlier in terms of the initial resistance, because if you're, a teacher and what you're used to doing is trying to differentiate your work to meet the levels of the students. So now what we're telling teachers, we're not going to find a second grade text for an 8th grade student because the data shows that they're reading at a 2nd grade. What we're going to do, we're going to find either grade appropriate or above grade appropriate text to introduce our students, and we're going to teach our students to the best degree possible to help them interact and engage with the text, and that's our responsibility. Now, the initial question was, well, hey, if Malik, can't read this book that's at the 3rd grade level, then, how are they going to interact with, say, the Constitution? And the response is like, you know what, that you're probably right, but if Malik can't read Dr. Seuss, he can't read the Constitution. And those aren't the students that we're necessarily worried about, because we're going to put in place different interventions for those students. The students that we're worried about are the students who are close to grade level or above grade level, because what they're used to is getting a piece of literature or informational text and the teacher asking a question and then waiting for the teacher to give them the answer. And now we're forcing students to answer and find where you found that information. So say 3, 4, 5 years ago, a great question is like, hey, what do you think the author meant when he said this statement? Now that's not an appropriate question. And so now what we're asking our teachers to do is like, not only what do you think the author meant, but show us in the text where you found a piece of information that lets you know this is what the author believed. And when we're using text that is either above their grade level or that is extremely complex or informational or technical, it pushes them a lot further. It's the idea of if you're, say, a marathon runner, if you're training for a marathon, if you're only running 1 mile because that's all you believe you can do, you're never going to be able to get to 15 or 20 miles. But if on some days you push yourself to do that long run, that 15-mile run, that 18-mile run, you're going to be able to get your body to do that. So we're training our teachers to train their students in the same way. 1 week out of the month, we're going to engage with the same text that is extremely complex, and we're going to help you dig through this text to the best degree possible. You may not get all the information, but by the end of the week, you're going to demonstrate some level of understanding. And when they take their assessments, then we can see where they're failing. And then the second piece that we've had success with is helping students and teachers change their mindset around their actual average on an exam. So, as a teacher, you may say like, hey, my class average of 100 kids is like 75%. That's pretty awesome. Like, now it's time to move on to the next standard. Whereas the way in which we approach it is, great, your class average is 25%. Now, as we move on to the next set of standards, we have to make sure that we are interweaving a reteach plan to touch on that 25% that the students didn't get. That's a lot. Often that's, what we forget about. What students get right, the 80%, the 50%, they got it right. We can move on from that, but we still have to address that 25% of the standard that they didn't get right, that 30%, and as we're going forward with the lesson. So those are some of the things, making sure that we're integrating complex text and making sure we're rethinking the way in which we reteach the standards that we introduce our students to.
One thing that's really interesting about our school is that we really are embracing a 21st century model of education. When we think about the 21st century, we want students to be able to collaborate, to think critically. We want them to be able to be innovators. We want them to be able to know how to go deeper into various skills. Our entire school's philosophy is all around how do we personalize the educational experience that students receive so that they're able to maximize their trajectory of growth, while we as the educators are helping to facilitate and guide that process. So that sounds really lofty. That sounds really, really deep. But how we do it has been the big challenge. One of the ways that we are doing this, and by no means do we have it figured out, but one of the ways that we are doing this is by rethinking the concepts of our grade level and teacher teams. So I should have actually told you all this. Our school, we recently moved into one of the newest buildings in Baltimore City, the newest building in our side of the city in 20 years. My third and fourth grade classroom area looks like this room. I have series of flexible open spaces, literally, that look like this room, with a bunch of tables and chairs. I have some individual classroom spaces. I have 6 teachers for about 126 kids. So all 6 of you who traditionally are used to just teaching 3rd grade language arts and 4th grade math, how are you all working together as a group to address the needs of all of the 126 students that operate in this space? One thing that we do is that for our literacy block, we actually break it up into 2 sections. The first one is a reading section where students are grouped based on their ability level. If we have a 2nd grader who's on a 4th grade reading level, their 2nd graders in a 4th grade reading group. If we have a 2nd grader who's on a 1st grade reading level, their 2nd graders in a 1st grade reading group. This model is based off of the work of Success for All. That's been around for about 25 years. So we're constantly looking at data to see how students are mastering objectives in literacy to move them in and out of groups. And we do that, do that grouping, flexible grouping 4 times a year. For the other part of literacy, we use much more of a humanities-based approach so that we can really get to those nonfiction informational texts. During that time, students are grouped again based not just on their ability level, but based on real-time data of what they're mastering versus what they aren't mastering. And because we believe really strongly in cooperative learning and collaboration, we are trying to design learning opportunities that allow for students to work together, allow for students to use technology, allow students to work with teachers in small group learning environments, again, with the intent and purpose of, we believe that this particular pathway is the best way to maximize the trajectory of that child's growth.
And are there ways that the Common Core has facilitated that kind of collaboration?
Well, it really is the heart of it all, because the Common Core standards inform us on where and how we know that a child is maximizing their trajectory of growth. So how do I know that a 3rd grader has mastered 3rd grade standards unless I use the Common Core as the foundational base for that? By no means do we have it figured out, but the fact that we are intentionally choosing the learning opportunities that we provide to students, using the real-time folks that are in the room, teachers, but also using technology, also using peers, has been something that we've done to support our work in the Common Core.
Great, thank you. I want to open it up now to questions from other folks. All the way in the back.
Hi, I'm working currently with middle school students, and one of the things that concerns me is the lack of really strong professional development for our science and our social studies teachers, our world language teachers, on how to teach reading in a content course, because like many of us here, a lot of our students are not reading on grade level. And I think we're missing an opportunity to help our non-course subject teachers embrace the teaching of reading. And I'm wondering if you've had any success in doing that.
I'll speak first. So when I mentioned the Success for All model that we use, where students are grouped based on ability level, that means that every teacher in our building is teaching one of those groups. So yes, the science and social studies teacher, yes, the gym, music, and art teacher, the Spanish teacher, everyone. And I think pushing folks out and providing the professional development for them to understand how to teach those types of reading comprehension skills has helped us. We pushed people out, gave them the necessary training, but because everyone is now accountable for students' literacy development and growth, then once you get into your actual content, you can use the strategies that you did in the reading class inside of your class. One of the coolest things that I've seen is when our gym teacher is using some of the strategies that we use during reading as she's introducing new physical education concepts to students. She's actually having kids read close passages about a particular health issue before they actually get into the activity. And I think providing teachers, what I've seen our most success has been providing teachers with the core foundation and opportunity to learn about how to teach reading well so that they can see how that's applied across everything that we do.
So I've been in middle schools going on 5 years, and I'm struggling with how to get my ELA teachers, you know, to teach reading. And so when I think about my world language and other teachers, I'm kind of like, you know, like, wow. And it's not a slight on the skills of the ELA teachers, but just traditionally, secondary teachers are not taught in any of their training programs how to teach reading. So one thing that we do, beginning of the year, we have all of our students do a basic reading inventory, the SRI reading inventory, just so we have an idea of what their Lexi scores are. So we can use that data to inform our teachers in terms of the types of text that we can help them interact with. So in terms of helping them read independently and on their own, we want something that's closer to their Lexi level. In terms of our teachers helping them, say, read through a text, we want something that's at the Lexi level of their grade or above, because we want to help them struggle through it. The one piece of advice that I would say, like, is probably going to be an extremely arduous task to have your world language or social studies teacher or science teacher learn how to teach students to read. So one is, see if you can find like a reading intervention that may help those low SRI level reader students, you know, just work on, like, say, fluency. However, what your science teachers, world language teachers, and even your ELA teachers can do, those kids who are really close to being able to comprehend the text, is adopt school-wide I would say no more than 3, but 3 reading strategies that help students interact with the text and understand the text, whether it's something like a stop and jot. I don't know, but like, say, stop and jot, where all teachers can use that. So your ELA or your world language teacher is not necessarily teaching students how to read, but they're helping students engage and interact with the text, especially those students who are close to being able to comprehend the text. And if you're doing that throughout the entire school, these are practices that students it'll become automatic for them when they start to take assessments.
I mean, I think a lot of what I have is similar. One of the things that we do, and it sounds similar to what was first described, we do have a period in our schedule every day called results. It is a targeted intervention tutoring block that's already built into the schedule. And so based on data that we receive at the end of each week from short assessments that we call show what you know quizzes, scholars are put into small groups. 100% of the adults in the building teach during that first hour of the day. And so regardless of your content area, you are then pushing in and doing a small group intervention. This allows, we have meetings after school on Mondays to look at the data, but then to break up into teams to also make sure that we are providing every teacher with the skills that they need to provide that intervention. So as a science teacher, I may be assigned 7 scholars that I'm going to work with for the first hour of the day for the entire week. And they're the scholars who did achieve on their assessment that they took on Friday. So I'm actually going to be working with them on practicing that skill, but with a science text. And so it provides that cross-curricular or cross-content area collaboration. It also, though, happens within the same classroom. So if I am the science teacher, I do also get to see that English language arts teacher model that skill first, watch them teach as my peer, and then break off with my 7 scholars and work with them and get to model after what I saw that teacher do. I mean, I think it's a consistent struggle, but also making text non-negotiable for those teachers. And when you're reviewing those materials and making sure what's going in front of children always has text, it starts to help bridge that gap between that balance between content and text, because we know that once you hit a certain level, we stop learning to read, and now we're reading to learn. You need to gain that content from that specific text that you're reading.
Thanks for coming out and sharing your experience. I have about 30 questions, but you know, I'll start with one, and if the rest of the room doesn't pick up, then I'll come back at you. In particular, to Common Core, the transition, one of the things that we realized quite early was that the content knowledge of a teacher
And can
who
I
is
interrupt
doing
you
well.
and ask you to
Yes.
introduce yourself?
Oh, my name is Sean Hardnett.
I forgot earlier.
You didn't say that before.
I know.
My name is Sean
That's on me.
Hardnett, and I'm the chief of schools at Center City Public Charter Schools here in DC.
Thank you.
The content knowledge is pretty serious and quite an uphill battle for teachers who've been teaching their way for a number of years. What is expected of us in terms of content knowledge is significantly deeper than what had been expected of us. What's the work that you all are doing to support teachers in getting that? Like, they're acquiring it. They're literally putting stones on the path they're walking. What is the work that you all are doing to help teachers acquire that and then immediately turn it around and apply it in their own instruction?
I can jump in with that one. So one of the things that the principals do with each of the teachers is we have an individual weekly meeting with each of our teachers during the week. We've been doing this for about 4 years now. So every week, every teacher receives a 30-minute individual meeting. We have had to drastically change what we are addressing during those meetings when it comes to the content piece. So I mean, Sean, you obviously hit it on the head. Like the content knowledge piece is, I think, what's keeping most of us up at night because literally you're saying to teachers, be prepared. You've got to know this. You've got to know it so deeply and in all these different ways. But then we're also sitting with them in a meeting on Monday and realizing, okay, what you're supposed to be teaching on Friday, you only know it at the surface level, or this deep contextual and conceptual understanding isn't there for you. So how are you about to put it into the brains of 11-year-olds? And so for us, really refocusing those meetings to say, okay, instead of just looking at the assessment that you're going to be giving during the week, I need that assessment beforehand. I'm going to have already given you some feedback on that. What we're actually doing during this meeting is we are going to sit and break down every single standard, make sure that when we're going through it, I'm modeling for you actually other ways that you can arrive there. I'm introducing models to you. We're using a lot of different resources. So we're sending people before they come into the meetings on Better Lesson, Learn Zillion. I'm going through ANET, just trying to expose people to as many different things as possible so that they're coming with some understanding. But it's really adjusted that portion of the meeting from more like guiding questions and tell me what you're thinking and let's talk about your goal to actually doing a lot of instruction of adults. And I don't think that there's any way to kind of tiptoe around that. Or I think we're teaching teachers the understanding that they need to have, particularly when you're then even talking, whether it's the people who have been in the profession for a long time, who have their way of doing it, or the ones who are right out of college and then they feel, oh, I have a math degree, I'm good to go. And then you're looking at them and saying, absolutely not. You're not prepared right now to teach fourth graders. That's a concern. And so it's a hurdle for, I think, all of the teachers to really come to terms with that. But that goes back to that first question about the biggest surprise was just how limited some of that content knowledge is. Again, great people who are hungry and want to do this and want to do right by children, but we're teaching teachers now the content.
So I'm going to be honest and say part of this is still an ongoing struggle. So this year I have some series of first-year teachers where I want to teach them the content knowledge, instructional knowledge, classroom management across the board. And we are really fortunate that built into our schedule every Wednesday, we have a 2-hour whole school PD time. And we've been embarking upon professional learning communities. Specifically, at first we thought, for the new teachers. You know, the veteran teachers could help the new teachers learn more about their content, more about instructional strategies, more about how to deliver instruction quality into the classroom. But what we are finding in our PLCs and giving teachers opportunities to read professional articles and to go deeper into those things that for some of them they had not engaged in that kind of work since they left their graduate coursework. That has been so eye-opening because I took for granted how much more my teachers needed to know. And I don't have an answer, but I see that through our professional learning communities, we are collectively arriving together to how do we really build our own capacity of knowledge around the topics that are Common Core.
One thing is also looking at your student data. You know, like if there's standard 7.1A and students across the board in a teacher's class, they're not performing well, then we can easily go back and look at, the teachers and we can have the conversation about content knowledge. Often, we have educators who want to, put the blame on the students as to why they're not performing, in certain areas, but we have to balance that. And the challenging and rewarding part of the conversation that we have with teachers is helping them get to a point where they understand, like, hey, I don't know this information as deeply as I should. And often it's not necessarily a teacher's intelligence, it just really comes down to preparation. So finding time where teachers have the opportunity to plan and prep more, where you can't just go through and skim through the first 3 chapters and go in and try to teach. Like, you have to really dive deep, look at what the standards are, create meaningful objectives, and make sure that those meaningful objectives are connected to a well-structured lesson and activities so that they are hitting the standards. And then once we get, whether it's our short cycle data back or whether it's our interim assessment data back, we can kind of have those conversations, and we do that quarterly. We can have those conversations in terms of what the students aren't learning and how can we go back and reteach. Another thing that we do, we have our teachers submit their plans or their unit plans early, so we have the opportunity to review. Often teachers want you to come in and give feedback like, hey, how's this lesson? Like, well, I can give you 30 pieces of advice in terms of how this lesson was, but if we don't go back and look at your unit plans, I come in tomorrow and it's going to be a different lesson. I can give you 30 pieces of advice in terms of how to improve that actual lesson. But until your unit plans are strong, until your daily plans are strong, until they really reflect what teachers should teach and what students should learn, we're not going to have any progress. But I also challenge, you and others, the same way in which you said the rocks are being put in the path of the teachers as they're trying to plan, like those same rocks are even bigger are in the paths of their students. And so if we don't be aggressive as well, if we don't push and support, I'll say that, like our teachers to plan stronger units of instruction, then our students ultimately are going to be the one who suffer.
Other questions?
Good morning. I'm Cheryl Gooding. I teach mathematics in DCPS. And I've heard you talk a lot about ELA. What kind of support do you have for or strategies do you give your mathematics teachers?
So we, I guess the biggest area of focus for us with our math teachers has been slightly twofold. So the biggest piece is really around, or that we're focused on for this year, is really having teachers work to require scholars to arrive at an answer using multiple different methods or formats. And so literally, if you look at our curricular materials that we put in front of scholars every day, every single problem has multiple places where they have to arrive at the answer. But then also that second piece that we're folding in is so much more written justification and understanding of where people are. So we have done a lot of professional development sessions focused on the skill of everybody writes and the art of the sentence. And so really focusing with our teachers on how do we get scholars to really be able to articulate the mathematical concept that they've just demonstrated. And we're doing a lot more around also accountable talk in our math classes. So really working on scholars showing their work and then having others in the class really dissect it, break it apart, show how they could have arrived there in a different way. And so just being much more specific around content-based professional development sessions for those teachers so that they can also make sure that they have that understanding. But one of the other big pieces that we've done that we've found to be so valuable is creating that common planning time for the math teachers. So I am always off with, if I'm a 4th grade math teacher, I have the same 2 planning periods as the other 4th grade math teacher. And so we are working together and collaborating to say, how are we going to get there and what is the level that needs to happen. We've been very fortunate that our co-director of academic achievement, which is our principal role at our school, at our middle school, was also our director of math advancement for a number of years. And so she works very closely with those teachers on those skills. And in addition to that, she also teaches math. So I do think that the more you can have whatever leader it is that is working with your math team in there and actually doing that work ahead of time is really valuable. The only other piece of advice I would give regarding math, I think for both math and ELA, we also require that all teachers, when they submit We don't do lesson plans at our school. So I'm not interested in what you say you're going to do. Show me what's going to be in front of children. And so when teachers submit that over a week in advance of what's taught, they also have to submit it with all of the notes of what, like they actually have to work out the problems. They have to do all of that. That's really helped us to identify where there are gaps in their understanding that wouldn't be there if we had just looked at a lesson plan. And so that's also really helped us to say, wow, we're really stuck on this one approach. Have you thought about using this different approach? Or what are you going to do when they can't do step number 3 or where they're not understanding this?
So without being too repetitive, the one thing, so as well as making sure that our math teachers are helping students, say, go through the basic computation of problems, this is an example of, like, again, getting ahead of the curve. So, like, what we've done over the past 2 or 3 years is exactly what Susie said in terms of making sure that students can express themselves verbally and in writing, like how they arrived at an answer, and making sure students can also they also know how to get to the answer in multiple ways. And then the reverse, which is now going to be required at the end of the year PARCC exam, is like, hey, there are more than one right answer, you know, to this problem. So, like, let's start working on that now, because we know in the future these types of problems are going to come up. So that's one thing that we've done to really focus on making sure that our teachers are prepared, but we're also thinking in the future for our students, they're becoming more equipped to handle the increased rigor of the assessments that they'll have.
One thing that we actually recently just saw, so we use the NWEA MAP assessment as one of our benchmarks for student progress. And we noticed that particularly in our middle grades, and for us middle grades is grades 5 through 7, that there was such a wide disparity between the scores that students have received, and that there was such a great need for us to personalize the instruction and differentiate, really drill down to addressing the gaps, if you will. So blended learning has been a tremendous asset for us. Blended learning doesn't mean for us that you just put kids on a computer and the computer teaches them. But how are we strategically using some of the online tools? We have Dreambox and iExcel specifically at our school in Agile Mind. How are we using those tools, and how are we really pairing students together so that as peers, they're helping one another verbally and through writing justify their work and closing the gap? That's been the real big focus for us this year.
Let's stick with math for a minute and talk about parents. At the Gates Foundation, one of the things that I hear a lot is a lot of frustration from parents about math homework that they can't help their kids with. Because if a parent can't help their kid with math homework, then one of two things are happening. Either there's something wrong with the homework, or there's something wrong with the parent. And human nature, you can guess which way they tend to fall on. Yep. So you talked earlier, Katrina, about your parent universities. Yeah. But tell us about some other ways that you are helping parents help their kids with the new math homework that's coming home.
So I would say, as a parent, my kid isn't in middle school yet, so I can probably still help him with his homework. But once he reached high school and maybe the upper grades of middle school, I probably would not be the right person to help him with his homework. And so what we try to do is make sure that we have as many resources as possible for students in the building. So we just extend their learning. So honestly, like Monday through Thursday, I'm sorry, we have an additional hour built into the day where students can stay with any of their teachers, especially math teachers, to get that additional work. And we also have a program that goes, our Saturday school, where they have the opportunity to receive additional assistance in English and math. And most importantly, during the week, we call it our pull-out program. Once we get our assessment data back from our interim assessments, we look at the students who are extremely close to what we will project as being, I guess, formally proficient or advanced, and we pull those students out of one of their elective class, about 10 or so students, and either English or math, and we provide them with small targeted group instruction. So we look at the standards that they were extremely close to, and our math teachers give them, so they go from a class of 27 kids to now a class of 10 kids, and they're focusing on a discrete set of standards that will help them perform and help them do their homework. So a lot of what we have to do is create ways in which the parents don't have the burden or the responsibility of helping their 7th grade students do, linear equations or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm definitely not the person with the answer to this. We approach homework actually pretty differently for the reason that we don't feel like it is the parent's responsibility to really be the one who's supposed to be teaching them at home. Supporting, absolutely. Ensuring that it's done and creating a space for it to be done, absolutely. But we are given the blessing and opportunity every day to have them for 9.5 hours, and so it's really our job to make sure that we're teaching them. So we don't send homework home on a topic that we have just introduced. So if we are literally introducing adding fractions, a child will not bring home anything that has them practice adding fractions for about a week and a half. And the idea is that way they've had multiple exposures, they've had an expert modeling it in multiple different ways, and they've had numerous at-bats to really practice that with the guidance of somebody who is really there as the content area expert. And so that way the goal is that by the time they do bring that home with them, they're practicing perfect versus practicing incorrectly. Everybody in the room is an educator. You know it's way more difficult to reteach something when a misconception is already in your head than it is to actually teach on a blank slate. And so we try to eliminate that opportunity with the understanding that even in that week and a half, not everyone's going to master everything perfectly. So the one kind of thing that we do put there as another cushion is that every single homework assignment also goes home with a completely scripted out and annotated example, so that the scholar can then use that as a reference. But again, it's not intended to be the parent's job to do that teaching at home.
Very similar. Our school is an extended school day. We go for about 8.5 hours, 4 days a week. We really, again, try to incorporate the use of technology to support the practice portion of math. So some of those programs that I mentioned, the licenses students are able to use at home. So frequently, instead of a child coming home with a homework worksheet, they may have to log on to Dreambox for 20 minutes. And Dreambox, of course, is the extra piece that helps give kids examples and provides that support. That's just been one approach. The challenge that I've seen, again, with our parents, because we've been really, really working hard on this, is, and I should also say our school is in a low-income urban community. And I recognize that for some of my parents, school was not a good place for them. School was not fun. School was not a place that they liked. So they already come to us with some of those perceptions, and that I have to seek to just provide a new, fresh start to the school experience for the parent so that they can translate that feeling onto the child. So we really try to be open and honest and transparent about the times in which parents can come in to practice and observe and watch what children are learning. Parents have access to a lot of the resources that our teachers are using through the programs that we have online. And again, providing those opportunities for us to kind of come together and talk about it. Another thing kind of separate from the specific math conversation, but something that we're fortunate to have in our school, is that a part of our school's campus, we have a family resource center. And that family resource center is staffed by a team of family advocates. So those family advocates are not just providing support. They do provide support for job placement, career advice, things of that nature, but also GED prep and those kinds of things to actually help parents build their own knowledge and tools. So that's been kind of another approach as a part of our desire to be an anchor for the community, is that we try to just think about meeting the needs of the whole child and meeting the needs of the whole family.
Questions?
Hi, I do a lot of data analysis, and my question is, what kind of collection tools are you using on a weekly or bi-weekly basis to kind of get a pulse of where your students are at in terms of the Common Core? But then, really, how are you making sure that that data is driving the instruction going forward?
So on a bi-weekly basis, we have what we call our short cycle assessments in there. I'm not sure if everyone knows what those are, but essentially all of our teachers in at every grade level and every content area give their students a 10 to 15, if you want to just look at it as easily as possible, quiz every other Friday. And they do them on either online or on Scantron, and we use a just an online resource where the students go and they answer their questions. The teachers run the Scantron, and all their data is already disaggregated, so they can look at how the kids did on which standards. I mean, and mind you, a few years ago we had teachers do this by hand, and they hated me. But now it's all electronic, and so essentially, at the end of Friday, they have all their data disaggregated. They can go through and they can see what questions the students got right, which questions they got wrong, how many students, like why they chose answer A instead of answer D. They can look at the stems, they can look at, you know, the standards that's connected to. That following Tuesday with their grade level team, they have a data meeting where over the weekend, essentially, they complete a data reflection sheet, and they go through and they make all their assumptions or come to their conclusions based on the data that they have. That following Monday or Tuesday, they have a meeting with their grade level team, and they also have that conversation, and their colleagues around them give them feedback in terms of how their students perform, and they talk about what are some of the things that are strategies that they use the past week to teach that standard, and then they come up with a reflection plan, and then they interweave a reteach on the standard that they believe students should have done well on, but they didn't do well on for the upcoming unit. And then once they hit their next short cycle, not only are they assessing them on whatever standards that they currently taught, but they weave in 2 or 3 questions from the standards that they retaught. So it's kind of like ongoing. And the biggest, when I know it's working or when I know a teacher is doing it well is I can go to that teacher, and before our interim assessments, our big time interim assessments, I can say like, hey, Mr. Abate or Mr. Tumani, you know, what standards are your kids not going to do well on? Or what standards are your kids really going to do well on? And then we get the data from the interim assessments, and they're dead on, they're extremely close. And that lets me know that they're using their data to inform their practices. We talk about it a lot, but I also have to make sure I'm engaging with the teacher so they know that when we get to the end, I'm not going to look at them in a punitive, from the sense of, hey, your kids didn't know this, but what that lets me know is you are informing your practice and you're trying to like change your practice. And we would rather go in knowing our kids are not going to do well on, you know, a certain standard, and we can find additional time to help reteach that standard versus just going in blind.
So you need to keep that to yourself, because our teachers still have to do it by hand, and so they probably still hate me. So, but we do something, it sounds pretty similar. So every Friday, like I mentioned before, we do have a 10-question show what you know quiz in each of the content areas. It only assesses what's been taught that week. Right. So you never go too far without knowing exactly where you stand. Those quizzes are graded Mondays after school. We come together first as the grade level team, and literally that data is projected up on the board for everybody to see. You've got to own it. It's on you. You can't say that you taught it if they didn't learn it. So we put it up there, everybody sees it, and that's where we create those intervention groups that then are conducted for the next following week. So one of the really nice things we think about in education, we tell teachers all the time, you got this data back, you see that you need to do something different, but there isn't time built in to do it. So that is why we have that hour built into the day, so that teachers know that they can create those action plans and have an immediate place to implement that. The one other thing that we did this year to again continue to support specifically literacy is when we adopted the Engage New York modules, we give approximately 70 minutes of the class period or of the literacy block for the Engage New York lessons. The additional 35 minutes are then dedicated to stations that are driven by the data that was taken from either that Show What You Know quiz or a larger assessment. So we just completed our first cycle of achievement network testing. We have our data day next week. That will also help to inform us as they go into those station work. So it allows teachers to really stay on a pretty consistent cycle of their scope and sequence and keep their pacing in an appropriate way, but it also provides that opportunity for them to do that. Okay, we just got the data. They didn't learn it, and we need to go through and we need to reteach in different ways.
Can I just jump in real quick? So Susie just mentioned that like what they assess what was taught that week, and that's what we did the first year. What I noticed, like all of our students' scores were pretty high, and that was because teachers were assessing students on what they taught, not what they were supposed to teach during that 2 weeks. And it gives them a false sense of accomplishment where, hey, I just didn't get to this set of standards, so I'm going to take them off this assessment and add some more questions on what I taught. Whereas what we have our teachers do is like submit their short cycles early, and what we want you to do is what you were supposed to teach, that's what your students, so if you didn't teach it, that's okay, but now it gives us that data that's real versus somewhat inflated because I just created a test on the 3 things that I taught.
Yeah, you have to have the assessment first, or it doesn't make sense with that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We have teachers, when we do our quarterly assessments, they develop those first and they peer review them within the team. So the second grade team reviews the first grade's test, and the first grade team reviews the second grade's test prior to us reviewing it for kind of final feedback before the test is actually given. And then that's it. Once you say that this is what we're going to hold students to and these are the standards, then once the assessment is given, it has to be the same thing. One other thing that, because data is such an important part of our conversation, but I realized, very similar to content knowledge, that some of my teachers just did not feel comfortable about that big D word because that wasn't something that they were used to having to talk about. And so I have a great team of data coaches that we have on board in our staff that help to facilitate those conversations to make them meaningful and very similar to your role. And I'm in a hybrid place. So some of my data, I'm really fortunate. Our district has a tool called Data Link where we can create assessments or use district assessments, upload them online. Students take the test on computers, and we can get the data pretty quickly. And then we have for our literacy, like writing, for example, that is a pretty arduous thing. We have to just sit and really read things and write it. But I think what we all are saying that's similar is that the time is built in the schedule for teachers to do it. So when we have our collaborative planning blocks, all 6 teachers that are part of a cluster are all meeting at the same time. And that was a challenge for me because then I needed to find what are the kids going to be doing while 6 teachers are meeting. But that was really important in order for them to have that rich conversation all at the same time.
I think there were questions over here.
I have a question. Did you any of you do anything on how to read the Common Core document? In other words, did you break it down or have a plan on, the anchor standards versus the grade level standards versus the performance tasks? How you read this document, how you interpret it, and could you tell me a little bit about that? I'm Bill Lipscomb from Ideal Academy Public Charter School.
Thank you. And you're talking about with teachers?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So about 3 years ago, our district engaged in that work, and that was something that we opted into participating in because I thought it was going to be important for our teachers, very similar to what we had to do as school leaders, is to be normed about what the exemplars were, what they mean, what do the anchor standards mean. So we have been fortunate that our district has kind of done the big heavy lift of that so that when we're in the school setting, we're kind of drilling down to, okay, what does this look like in our actual practice?
So that's ongoing work, mainly because whether you have, say, new teachers or teachers are trying to, like, say, create new units, it's ongoing work. And a lot of it for us comes in when we're reviewing teachers' unit plans to make sure that their objectives are connected to a standard, to make sure that their objectives make sense and it reflects the standard that they believe should be covered. And so it's something that it's not we're like, hey, let's take out or print out all the standards for the Common Core and go through one by one to try to interpret what they're saying. Because even if you look at them, especially in social studies or in ELA, they're pretty much the same. At least I know in grades 6 through 8, they're pretty much the same across each standard. But it's like, how do you make sure that this standard is at a higher level once the students gets to the next grade? And that's something that has to be, until you feel extremely comfortable, but that's something that has to be like ongoing with your faculty and staff.
Mm-hmm. So we did 2 different things. So in the past, so our teachers come back 4 weeks before the school year starts, so we can do a summer institute with them. One of those weeks is specifically focused on curriculum and the standards. In the past, during that week, we've had teachers actually break down all of the standards and then find like assessment items that would align and think of lesson activities and all of that. This year, we actually did something different. For the first time ever, we actually just gave it to the teachers, and we spent a lot more time having them dive deeply into the document and really see and then add on to it versus trying to create it from scratch. The other thing that is such a simple win, but we found it to be one of the most beneficial things that we did to have teachers develop a clearer understanding of the standards this summer was every single person in the building. It does not matter what your role is in the building. Every single person on our staff took the park assessment sample tests before the school year started. And so it gave people a very different understanding of what a potential end product could look like, because we can talk about performance tasks or the different types of questions that are going to be asked. We just wanted folks to see what those looked like before they started thinking about lessons and planning and things like that.
Good morning, I'm Siobhan Gibson. I'm the principal of Center City Public Charter Schools Brightwood campus. A lot of times, school leaders, we spend time thinking about the tested grades, and we ignore our earliest learners in early childhood programs. So for those of you that have early childhood programs, can you talk about the steps that you've taken or continue to take to ensure that even our youngest learners have the solid foundation needed so that they can then tackle the Common Core as it relates to the tested grades?
So I don't have any early childhood grades, but as a school leader that will at some point benefit from the strong foundation that's set at those levels, like right now, I would definitely just jump on what she said in terms of having teachers have your kindergarten, first grade, second grade teachers take the PARCC exam, the practice one that's online. I was having a conversation with an elementary school principal, and I just told her yo, pull up the 5th grade PARCC assessment. And she was looking at it and it was like, wow. So if you have your early grade, just go through and look at a 5th grade or a 4th grade assessment and what it's asking students to do, is going to dramatically shift the way in which they have to develop or shift their instruction so that they are prepared to take these exams in the 3rd grade. So that's just my little plug on that.
So I have kindergarten on my K through 8 campus, and I think that vertical and horizontal planning process is really key. We've been fortunate to have our instructional leadership team is a kindergarten teacher. So she's able to really go out and look and see what's happening in other classrooms. And I think providing teachers with the opportunity, not just to talk, but again, to see and experience what's happening in the outside of, within the tested grades also provides them with a really strong perspective on it.
So we actually opened our elementary school campus last year. We had opened in 2008 with our middle school campus, which is 4 through 8, and then we opened full enrollment K through 3 last year. That was a huge learning experience for us, and so I will say that one of the things that we're shifting to get at that exact point is last year our kindergarten and 1st grade, so not just because of testing, because 2nd grade didn't test for us last year, but our K and 1 in particular, there wasn't the same focus on data collection, analysis, and response. And for us, that's been a major shift this year, because obviously it doesn't matter if they're tested or not. They can't be leaving kindergarten without knowing how to read. They can't. These skills set them up for just success in life, not even testing. So we're doing a lot with our teachers. We've been creating a lot of different documents on anecdotal ways to be taking notes down during every lesson, to be collecting that data and responding to it. But what we also did this year, so literally we just finished ANET testing yesterday, and so our 2nd through 8th graders all did ANET testing. We created internal assessments that our K and 1 also took at the same time, so that we can get more data on all these skills being spiraled on a lengthier assessment. It was kind of comical in the kindergarten classes in our first go at it yesterday, to be honest, so I'm definitely not the person to set the tone for that, but it was a learning experience. And so at least though now we have different levels of data that we can really sit down and talk through and analyze. And so our K and 1 teachers go through the exact same process on next Monday when we have our data day for ANET. They're going to be going through the exact same data process.
And I also want to add, because when you said it, actually reminded me. So I mentioned that we used the MAP assessment, and the MAP assessment is an online tool. We had all students, including kindergartners, participate in this assessment online. So when you talk about a learning curve, setting up computer stations with 5-year-olds to show them how to put on headsets, use mice, drag and drop, all those things that are assumed that children know how to do by the time they take the park. Was really eye-opening for us as well. So we have built in a STEM component in our K through 4 program that really teaches those skills explicitly. So our STEM, we often say we are STEM with a capital T for technology, because we really want students to actually have the tools to play the game, to know how the game even works. And that has been really eye-opening for our primary grades as well, because they didn't know that these were the things that their children would have to know how to do by the time it came time for them to actually take the assessment.
Hello, my name is Sumalo Hamilton Samuel. I am a curriculum specialist with the Boys and Girls Club. And my question was, what role do you see out-of-school time programs playing in supporting this initiative, especially those that have academic components or curriculum or offer curriculum?
So, well, I'll start. Our after-school program provider partner is the Y of Central Maryland. So, as I said, our school day is an extended school day. We go from 8:45 to 4:30, 4 days a week. And then the Y picks up from 4:30 to 6. So I often joke that kids have their breakfast, lunch, and dinner in our school facility. It's been very interesting for us to engage in conversations with our out-of-school program partners, because just like for our parents, just like for our community stakeholders, this is such a new conversation to be had. And so right now we're just at the stage of just starting the conversation, establishing common ground before we can even jump into what you do. But the one key shift that I've seen we've been able to implement is the notion of homework time. What does that look like? What does that mean? How do you help a child? What resources do you bring in? That's been something that, at least in this first iteration, we've really tried to be intentional about being on the same page about what that time looks like. It's not just about coloring and filling out a worksheet. We need children to do more and have more opportunities within that time.
For me, I would say is also about like just providing the space and support for students to get their homework done or get to do work and interact with literature or other types of resources that would enhance their literacy skills. Like, even if students just had the opportunity to go to the rec or go to the library and pick up Sports Illustrated or something that they just wouldn't naturally be able to engage with throughout the course of the day, is going to indirectly benefit us as a school. So like, it's not my expectation that, you know, like at the rec that the center directors or the workers there are going to be able to teach students like how to, say, solve complex problems or how to, like, say, interact with the park exam in terms of the drag and drop, but in terms of like helping them find text that's really engaging to them and to keep them engaged and to provide them with the safe space that they need to work is important for us.
We haven't engaged in the conversation at all. We're still trying to get teachers doing what they need to do. So we're very much so focused on the people we have in our building, and hopefully we can get to a point where we do engage others.
Over here. Good morning. I'm Christine Amis, and I'm from the Children's Guild. And one of the themes that has been coming out this morning is how we're preparing our teachers, our school leaders, our parents for the instructional shifts in teaching and learning. I'm wondering what you're hearing from the students. And for some of our little ones, it's all they know. But for some of our older students, what do you hear them saying about these shifts? Thank you.
I don't know if we're hearing anything too dramatic from children. I think the one thing that they've pushed back a bit on is reading the same text over and over and over again. Yeah. They're like, what? I already read this. I mean, one of the books in the Engaged New York module is one of the Percy Jackson book. Unfortunately, everyone's seen the movie. So now we've seen the movie and we're asking them to read it about 6 times. So that was a little rough the first couple of days. I mean, I think children rise to expectations, right? And so if we set high expectations and say, you know, when they come into the class, this is what we're doing today, this is what we're gonna, and we make it engaging and we set it up in a way that allows them to have their voice heard, to think critically and to engage with one another, they can meet it. So, you know, I don't think that we've been as, or that we've had from parents, from teachers, from students, I just don't think that we've had the same pushback or issue with Common Core, that somehow the news is talking about it all the time, how everybody's up in arms. I haven't heard anything, so everybody seems fine with it. But I think the only thing is that text-based piece.
Yeah, students want to be engaged. I mean, so is it a good thing that students are not, say, aware of the shift really consciously in terms of from Common Core to previous standards? I don't know. I don't have that answer, but I know whether it was standards from 30 years ago or standards, you know, 30 years in the future, if they're not engaged, that's when they complain. And so, like, when we have to do the close reading and we're rereading the same text to, like, gain various types of understandings from it, how are we as a school, as a classroom, making sure that the students remain engaged as we go through this piece multiple times? But engagement and the feeling that they are getting smarter and the payoff when they take the assessments, that keeps them motivated. And that's, like, the beautiful thing. In the secondary school, still working at the middle school, like, they're still excitable. Whereas you get to high school, they're thinking, you know, trying to get into college and other things, but they're still really excited if they have X% right on their assessments and they can connect it back to what they were engaged with in class.
And I would just echo, I think keeping the excitement factor high and celebrating the small victories has really helped our school.
Great.
Hello.
No?
I'll go over here.
Oh, great. And then we'll come back to you.
My name is Keena Allison, and I'm a science teacher and instructional coach at Thurgood Marshall Academy, Public Charter High School. And I wanted to push a little more on her question in terms of the struggles with student accountability. So not so much the kids talking specifically about Common Core, but just completing homework and bringing it back. Have you had more students who have to repeat grades because you're looking at all this data, and if they are not meeting the mark, are they having to, you know, stay in the same grade? I know you spoke about how they're moving in different groups based on where they are, but if you're in a more traditional system, are you seeing students who are having to stay in the same grade for another year or more than that because they're not meeting the standards set?
And I'll add another dimension to that question to bring up parents again. How are you communicating with parents about student performance on the assessments to keep them in the loop?
We haven't seen an increase in retention rates, but I will say that we're also a school that doesn't believe in social promotion. So we've also, you know, had very honest conversations with families very early on. We actually say to them, we promise you that we're not just going to push your child through the system. And so, you know, a lot of people are like, that's not a good promise. Let them keep going. But for us, that's just something that we feel strongly about. But even making the transition a few years ago, we actually haven't seen an increase in that. I think it's all about having a longer term plan for how the year is going to look, when you're going to introduce these skills. But again, I can't stress enough how much I think that built-in intervention block really allows for some of those more foundational skills to be established and laid, so that then when we do go into the deeper understanding requirements, that time is there to really happen. I mean, we have an extended school day that also really helps. So children take 2 periods of math every day, and they take a 110-minute literacy block, and they read in every single period. So I do think that helps it. In terms of engaging parents, I mean, I think that we work really hard to send home the data as much as possible. So whenever they are taking specific assessments, so they see everything from Show What You Know quizzes to ANET scores to NWEA map we use as well. And so I think we're just trying to keep people engaged in the conversation from very early on so that they know where their child stands. Our biggest struggle is that so many of our children do come to us very far behind, but the parent has been told otherwise. So literally that first month of school, having conversation after conversation after conversation with parents who literally are in tears when we're saying your child is reading at a first grade level, and they just came to us in 5th grade, and they say, but that's not possible. They won the reading award last year at their school, or they were on honor roll. How is this happening? And so just recalibrating for families what the actual bar is supposed to be is probably our biggest struggle with that.
And actually, I'm going to add a complication to what you mentioned. Where I struggle the most with Common Core implementation is for my students with special needs and disabilities. And I don't have an answer, I'm going to just tell you now, about that question. But I think a lot about that. And I will agree that we strive to have very intentional conversations. We have a really fantastic student support system and intervention and enrichment component to what we do. But it is tough when students are struggling because of a cognitive, physical, emotional disability, and still trying to figure out how we can help get them closer and closer and closer to meeting the standards. I think that's the ongoing struggle of the work that we do. So I don't know if I have a good answer, but it's something that I think about in addition to what you mentioned. But the short thing is I haven't seen a difference in retention rates, though, because we do try to focus on individual growth, student growth more than anything, and trying to make sure that students are meeting the outlying goals that we established for them at the beginning of the year.
So at Kelly Miller, we have everything. We have from non-readers to students who are reading far above grade level. We have the disengaged student. We have students who are wholeheartedly engaged, even if there was just straight madness around them. We have parents from the disengaged to the extremely, engaged. So we have, it's just a true representation of our community, and that's a good thing. At the same time, we have not seen, say, an increase in retention. As a school, we don't necessarily believe in retention. At the same time, we don't believe in social promotion. They both have negative consequences in the end for students. However, if you do the research, retention is more, has more consequences than social promotion for a variety of reasons. What we do like to focus on is growth. So if we get a student that's reading at the 2nd grade and they're in the 6th grade, most likely they're not going to get to the 8th grade level by the time they leave us. However, if we can get them to the 3rd or the 4th grade level, then we've done a stellar job. And our goal is to make sure that the school that they go to has as much information as possible on that student. So again, at the beginning of the year, all of our students take a reading and a math diagnostic so we can see where they are. And the students who stay with us for 3 years, we've seen a tremendous amount of growth. Students who come to us midway, not so much, but being able to see a student go from being a non-reader to being, reading at the 1st grade level, or if you guys are familiar with SRI, to have a student who has a BR after they take the test to now they actually have a 3-digit number is pretty remarkable. And often it happens, like either in the middle of the year or by the end of the year. But that's really the goal, like she said, like we have to focus with our population more on growth, mainly because if we only recognize or reward the students who are getting 80% or higher on an exam, we're ignoring a large population of students. So we kind of flip it and we say hey, all students who on this interim assessment had a 5% increase, stand up. This is a reward. All students who had a double-digit percent increase on your interim assessment score, stand up. So that also recognizes the student that got 1 question right to now getting 3 questions right. It's still extremely low, but we're encouraging that student, and those students are going to be more motivated to do well versus they're always being ignored every time. So growth for our population is recognizing growth is one of the most motivating factors that that we use.
We have time for one more question.
Okay, so my question is actually related to students with special needs. I'm Nadia Garcia. I'm the Special Education Manager at DC Bilingual Public Charter School. So my question was in terms of how do you ensure that instruction is differentiated for all students in terms of a disability or even English language learners? And also, ensuring that the Common Core standards are implemented in the classrooms? And do you do anything different in terms of coaching for special education teachers?
I can start. We have had to really take a very close look at how we're approaching our scholars with special needs, whatever it is, in particular that department of our school. Obviously, our belief is that every child, regardless of the challenges, can and will succeed if given the right structures. And one of the things that we experienced was a huge growth in our special education population. We tripled over one summer, and just because another school had moved into our neighborhood that ended at the grade before we start. So they kind of fed into our school. And so that really was an interesting challenge, and we didn't grow fast enough to meet their needs. And so what we've actually been doing for the past year and a half, 2 years, is actually playing catch up. So this year we actually just brought on a director of scholar support, which is oversees our special education coordinators, and to really make sure that we're looking really, really closely at the needs of every single child. But then in addition to that, one of the structures that we weren't offering our special education teachers, which looking back on it, I mean, hindsight's 2020, but we have no idea what our rationale was for this, but they were not receiving the 30-minute weekly meeting that the general education teachers were receiving. They were pushing into those meetings with the general education teacher that they were supporting, but we weren't providing them with the same amount of support that they needed, and that was our major shortfall. So what we did was really revamp the support that our teachers are getting. So in addition to having their own 30-minute individual weekly meeting with the principal, they're also then having a meeting with their scholar support coordinator, which is our special ed coordinator, and that director of scholar support. So there's a lot more collaboration with that team. We've also created a time on those Monday afternoons when grade levels are meeting. They're meeting as a department to go over new strategies, look at data, and do different things. So I think it was actually us as a school and an organization really looking at what structures we had put in place, and there weren't enough there.
So we have close to 20%, 20+% of our population receive special education services, which really amounts to maybe 125 or so students, which is a pretty significant number. At the same time, what we've seen is, just based on what I was explaining earlier, we have such a wide range. We have students who do not receive special ed services who are pretty much performing, at least academically, like on the same level. So personally, I do believe that there is a over-identification of students. It's just they were underserviced in past years. However, we have to treat our special ed teachers the same as a general ed teacher and provide them with that same support. So in the 6th grade and the 7th grade, I have an ELA and math resource teacher, and they teach a resource class in ELA, and then they also they also push in to provide inclusion support in the class, and it's the same way for math. So the math and the ELA resource classes are a tad bit smaller once they go there, but they are required. They plan alongside with their counterpart, and they co-teach alongside with their counterpart. So when you go into my 7th grade, math resource class, they're teaching the same standards. If you just walk across the hall and see the students who are in a general ed, now it's up to the resource teacher, and it's up to the support that we provide to make sure that they're still receiving the differentiation that they need. But it's the same standard, it's the same skill, it's the same lesson, and that's what we have to do, because again, we're focused on growth. So we're not going to teach a 7th grader like 2 + 2. Like we can teach those basic computational skills along with teaching, a 4-step equation. But what we have to do for them is something that we also have to do for another significant percentage of our population that don't receive services.
And actually, our school follows very, very similar structures. I was thinking about your question about the ELL population, because that, and where my school is in particular, that's becoming a growing need. And I'm finding that for all of our teachers, we have to do a whole nother level of professional development to provide those supports and services and to understand the strategies and the needs of that growing population.
So we have just a few minutes left, and I wanted to give our panelists an opportunity, just in a couple sentences, to give everyone here a word of advice or a lesson learned as a closing thought.
Okay, great. So,
no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. Yeah, advice to solve the Common Core for everybody, right? So, I mean, I think the biggest thing is don't overlook what your teachers and leaders in the building need. Just constantly figuring out and being okay and creating an environment where people feel safe to say, I don't actually understand how to dive into this standard. I need some thought partnership. I need some resources. And the first thing is creating that space so that exists, but then also making sure that you're taking the time to equip yourself so that when those folks in your organization have that need, you actually have resources to provide to them.
I would say if you're at least in DC, whether you're public school or charter school, like, don't throw this year away. I know we're transitioning to the park and everybody's like, oh, okay, well, it's just baseline. It's not going to really matter. The year after is going to matter. Like, don't throw this year away. Like, this is a year where you have the opportunity, at least with no consequences associated with it, but to give yourself a true baseline, and you can be a tad bit more innovative and try some new things. I know we're in a win now kind of like atmosphere, but you still want to have teachers and your school leaders approach it like, we still want to win now, so that we know going into next year what the best practices, will be. So the biggest thing is don't throw this year away. I'm gonna just say it again, if your teachers and your school leaders in your buildings, if they have not at least gone through 10 to 15 questions on the park, like you're already like behind the 8 ball. Like, it dramatically shifts the way in which instructors have to provide instruction so that they can be prepared to answer these questions. And I'm not saying the test is an end all, but it is part of like how we measure our students' performance. So don't throw away this year, take the part.
I always tell our staff that the experts are in the room. And I think it's going to be really important, one piece of advice is to empower your teachers and your teacher leaders and your support staff to believe that they have the capacity to really make this shift for students. And with that said, that because this is a great opportunity year for innovation, that they really are engaging in safe practice opportunities to try new strategies, to try new approaches, even if they fail, but to try and see what works and to provide that ongoing feedback so that they can believe that they have what it takes to make this happen and make this work.
Great, thank you. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you all for listening.